Hi, it's Rick Hansen here on Amazing Greats. Thanks for being with us today. We got a great show for you. We're talking with Shannon Bream, who is a national network journalist, an attorney. She was a Miss USA and Miss America pageant finalist. She loves fly fishing, even if she doesn't catch any fish. And we talk about in this episode, we talk about marriage, we talk about friendship, we talk about being young and Christian, what's good about America, Shannon's personal challenges, and her prayer life. All here, one episode right now with Shannon Bream from Fox News. Well, it is my distinct pleasure to have as our guest Shannon Bream from Fox Network. And, it's very cool that our mutual friend, Ron Hoon, out in Phoenix, Arizona,
Yes.
does Fox Morning. Is the anchored there for years. He and I are lifelong friends, and he said, you got to talk to Shannon because she has got an amazing story and she's got a book out. So we need to talk about both of those things. So good morning to you here. I guess on the East Coast, your afternoon, but we're still morning here in Seattle. So thank you, Shannon, for being here.
I love being with you. And what a great name for your show. Amazing Greats. I love when people do a play on words. I've got a podcast, Live in the Bream, which people think is sort of cheesy, but funny. And so I love when you can spin a word or a phrase.
Yeah, and it kind of all fits because that's what this podcast is all about, talking to people who have been successful in doing what they do, but importantly, how God has been a part of all of that as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about not only the book, but we're also going to hopefully take a few minutes to talk about you and your personal journey, because testimonials are what we're all about here. So if that's okay with you, let me do a quick introduction. For those who don't know your story, I can hit the highlights here. First of all, Shannon is a legal, you're an attorney, and then a
Mhm.
journalist, and on top of that, you're the chief legal correspondent at Fox News. You were at Fox News at night for years, and now you host
Mhm.
Fox News Sunday, and you have, like you mentioned, your podcast, which is out there, and the new book, which is exciting. It's called The Love Stories of the Bible Speak. And we're going to speak about that first, I think, to kind of get into what that's all about. And then we're going to jump into Shannon Bream's own personal story, if that's good for you. So are you ready?
Sounds great.
All right.
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. First of all, the book. Some would say, and I've heard it said, that the 66 books of the Bible as a package is a love story. The whole deal is a love story. But you've taken, I think it's 12 love stories out of the Bible and focused on those. Can you kind of tell us, just give us the oversight of what this book does, and some of the stories that you surface and focus on?
I think you're exactly right. To me, I view the Bible as God's love story to us about how he's pursuing and forgiving and merciful, loving Father who has created a way for us to be in fellowship with him and that he wants that relationship with us. So I agree with you. I think the whole Bible is sort of his love story to us, but there are individual stories too. And I think everything's included in the Bible for a reason. So we have a section on romance, which you would think of as love stories. The original Adam and Eve, Ruth and Boaz. I tackled the Song of Solomon, which probably was the most intimidating part of this book. But I also wanted to look at deep friendships. Think about Jonathan and David. I love the stories too about Daniel and his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Paul and the friendships he had in the New Testament and how they were so critical to building the early church. So all of those things, along with God's command that we love our neighbor as ourselves, and it's not just the easy ones we get along with that we agree on everything about, but the difficult people, and sometimes we're the difficult neighbor. But the fact is, God has called us to be selfless in the way, radically selfless in the way that we love other people.
Yeah, no, somewhere along the line, I've been doing my research, and I've been stalking you to
Okay.
to pluck out some
Seems like a friendly
jewels.
stalker.
And one of the things that you did say is that, as far as you could tell, and you've been through the Bible a few times, there are no exceptions to that. There are no
Yeah.
exceptions to who you get to love and who you don't get to love, right?
It's true. And it's not just an idea that, oh, we just go through life and we try to spread, rainbows and unicorns and flowers and happiness. I mean, Loving people doesn't mean what that we agree on everything, but we can sit down and have conversations. We can share truth and grace and mercy with each other. And the fact is, what we're called to do is to treat others, love others as ourselves. And all of us come out of the womb as selfish beings. That's just our preset. That's the way that we are. So if we're thinking about ourselves as being first, like, I want the last piece of cake, or I want to be the first person in line for this, or whatever it is. I mean, we all have to fight that selfishness that I think is inherent in us. And I think we can do a good job with that. But think about what you want for yourself, and God's saying that's how you're supposed to treat everybody else.
I love that. That's absolutely so great. So you have been, and now I want to kind of separate. There's kind of two sections to the book. One is the kind of the marriage, romance,
Mhm.
intimate relationship, and then the other part is the friendship part. And the first part, you're not. Maybe you wouldn't call yourself an expert, but you're pretty close. You've been married for 28 years to
Yes.
one guy named Sheldon, and I've
Yep.
done a little research on him too. What a great guy he is. So
He
give us some
is.
hints on how marriage works. How can we make our marriage work better?
I do think it goes back to this idea of selfish versus selfless. Some people will say, oh, it's a 50-50, but I really think both have to be giving 100%. And you learn along the way. I mean, you hurt each other, you're selfish, and you say things and you do things and you make mistakes. I mean, we got married at 25 and we grew up together in a lot of respects, but we've had tough patches like I think every marriage is going to have. And I think young people need to know that it's okay. They're coming, you work through those. And most of them you can get through, not everything. But God gives us some outs when marriage is abusive, when there's infidelity, other things. But most of what we encounter in life is going to be just the selfish desires that we have in trying to share one household with somebody in this pledge to stick together for life. And so I think it's when you start to be each other's biggest cheerleader. I don't want anybody else to be Sheldon Bream's bigger cheerleader than me. I'm always, pushing for his success and for his happiness and for spiritual growth. And we have to challenge each other for that. But I think the more that you can admit, I come to this as a marriage, as a selfish person, where can I work on myself? And where can I be cheerleading for the other person and putting them first and seeking their happiness and their wholeness and their spiritual growth? I think those things just go a long way. When you share faith, I don't know how people do it without that because both of us are very committed Christians and have grown in many respects together and individually in that. And I find it's a great buffer to say, God, we're stuck on this issue. We're stuck on this decision. We're stuck on this problem. Let us pray and work through it. And that's just been a huge help and a glue in our marriage when we've hit, rocky patches.
What about the marriages that don't have that? Do you have any suggestions or thoughts about that? The husband or the wife is very steeped in their faith,
Mhm.
and their spouse isn't. Is there some resolution there, or is it all about maybe prayer?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that and God's grace and mercy in walking through your situation can be very difficult. I know people have walked that path and it's tricky and it's hard, but God calls us as believers to just be faithful where we are and with what we have. And one of the stories I have in the book is about King Xerxes and Queen Esther. And the fact is, I mean, she was obviously of the Hebrew people, and there God positioned her to save them, to save the Jewish people. King Xerxes, we never see that they share any of those beliefs or faith or anything else, but because of her faithful witness, her respect for him, the kind of wife that she was, when it really counted, he respected her. And when she came to him to say, I have to ask you for something very, very critical and important, he was so enamored of her and of her example as a wife that he said to her, up to half my kingdom, I will give you, just ask. And that's so different than the way the book of Esther starts when he has this Queen Vashti who doesn't do exactly what he wants and he just banishes her. So for whatever example that Esther was in her faithfulness, her deference, her respect for her husband, they weren't linked together in the same faith, but God was still able to use him and use that marriage.
Oh, wonderful. That's very cool. So now let's jump into the friendship side of this. I
Hmm.
think somewhere again that I found that you had said or I read that men particularly have a difficult time. There's actually a friendship recession among men who are struggling with loneliness and have trouble connecting with other men in a spiritual and faithful way. Can you
Yeah,
speak to that?
yeah, it made me really sad when I started reading recent studies on this that men find it really difficult to be vulnerable and transparent. I think they get so many mixed messages probably from society about be tough, no, don't be so tough, be masculine, don't be masculine, open up, no, crying is weak. I mean, it's tough. And I think that as I looked into those statistics, I think, COVID really hurt too, because we all, for a year or two, depending on where you lived, you felt very isolated in some of those normal bonds and relationships, whether it was in the workplace or men's group or whatever, seeing guys at the gym. A lot of those kind of got torn apart, and men were back to this place of having to really be intentional about relationships. I talked to a high profile CEO who said to me, a bunch of us were supposed to go out with our wives and something happened. The wives couldn't go. The guy said, okay, well, let's just go to dinner anyway. He said we sat there for a couple of hours and realized how much we missed just talking to other men and sharing the burdens that we have in our lives, whether it's about personal or professional things. But that dinner reminded him, like, gosh, we need to just spend time together as dudes and be vulnerable with each other. And that's how we form really close friendships that can help support each other. So I think Jonathan and David is a beautiful example of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and we're going through a thing at our church right now. It's just starting up. It's called Men Mentoring Men. And
Mm,
it's all about that. It's all about getting together. And, when guys get together, usually it's talking about sports teams or maybe
right.
the weather or some surface
Yeah.
stuff. And it takes a bit. Vulnerability is the key, I guess.
Yeah.
Takes a bit to get below that level and into something that's a little deeper than just the surface stuff that's going on around us. So I love that part of it, and that's great because this is your other books that you've done, and this is your fourth, if I'm not mistaken, book.
You're right. Mhm.
So this is the other ones have pretty much kind of been female slanted, but this
Mhm.
one kind of helps guys along as well, right? So it's a good book for a
Yeah.
guy to pick up as well. And because of your other books, we might want to distinguish this one as being special for both male and
Yeah.
female. So yeah.
Yeah, Love Stories of the Bible Speak. It's the third in the Bible series. And I've had men and couples stop me and tell me, oh, we're working through this book together. And we're, looking at our own relationship and we're having conversations. And so I love that. I mean, I've always been really touched when people say to me that one of these books, and they all have study guides now. So the people have done them as church groups or a neighborhood book group or whatever it was. I had one guy stop me at church a few months ago, earlier this year, and he said, my men's group did your first book in this series, The Women of the Bible Speak. And he said, we decided to do it to learn these stories that were really important, in the context of our mothers and wives and daughters and sisters. I said, I've never had a guy tell me they did the Women of the Bible speak as a Bible study, but I love that. But yeah, I'm hearing more from couples that they're taking this Love Stories of the Bible speak and workbook study and doing it together.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back and just grab the history of Shannon Bream a little bit here, and that goes back to when you were born. I mean, you were born into a Christian family, right? Tell us a little bit about those early days.
Yeah, I was. My parents were baby Christians. They were so young when they got married too, early 20s, had me on their second wedding anniversary, and their marriage didn't last much longer. And so my parents broke apart when I was very young. I was very blessed in that they both remarried to wonderful people. So I've always felt sort of like I got the jackpot of four wonderful parents. And all of those, both of those couples really grew in faith over time to much deeper walks. And when my mom and I, when it was just the two of us, and then when she married my stepfather, who's a very strong believer, my mom had taken a job as a young teacher in a Christian school, and from there we were just immersed all the time, growing, being surrounded by scripture. And our church and school were linked together, so there was Awana for the kids, and there was youth group, and there were all of these things that it was just a whole community of faith for us. And so it gave me a really good place to start some roots
Yeah.
as a Christian.
But there was a moment, and I think everybody has a moment
Mhm.
somewhere along the way that it comes out of what your parents believe or the people, your parents, their faith, to make
Mhm.
it your faith and to find trust in Jesus on your own. And that happened for you in middle school. Can you explain, the exact details of that? Because that's always
Yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah. So I knew these scripture verses. I could quote them for you. I knew all about Jesus, but there was a moment, like you said, it can't just be your parents' faith, your grandparents, your community. I mean, you have to make a decision. And for me, that was at summer camp one summer, between seventh and eighth grade, where I really felt this pull, like this needs to be personalized. You need to decide, oh, I understand now the story of Jesus and of God and of the Holy Spirit. And I accept what Christ did and his sacrifice on the cross as his covering for my sins, great and small, that have gone, that will happen. And because of that, he makes a way for me to be in relationship with a totally holy, sinless God. And so it was at that summer camp that all the things I sort of knew in my head really came together as a personal commitment to Christ.
That's great. Did you get baptized at camp then at that
You know
point?
what I did? I didn't at camp, but when we came back, a bunch of us who had made commitments at camp, we did have a baptism ceremony at church.
Oh man, that's great. My son went to a Christian camp, and had called me from camp on the Friday. And this is kind of I was raised Catholic, and I had drifted away from my faith. And so when he called from camp, from Christian camp, and said, "Can I get baptized?" I'm saying, "Oh my, I failed my child. I
What's
didn't help him.
happening?
I didn't help him with this decision or even encourage it." But yes, he got baptized at camp as well. So it was very cool. So let's talk about youth, Christianity and youth. There seems to be, and the stats point to, again, a decline in
Mhm.
young people coming to Jesus and finding faith. Do you have? I mean, because of your position and because you kind of get this great view of the world, what's your thoughts on that? Do you think that's in reality what's happening, or why is it happening? Can you give us your thoughts?
We're getting a lot of data all the time. Pew Research is one of the groups that puts out a lot of this data, and there are others out there as well that talk about that young people are very skeptical of institutions, including organized religion. I mean, some of them will say, like, I believe in a God or I believe in something. I think there's something out there besides me, but they're very skeptical of church. I think various church scandals and different denominations and those kinds of things have really given them sort of a crisis of faith when it comes to making a personal decision or wanting to dig into that. I will say what is encouraging is that the people who are young people who are embracing faith seem much more serious about it. They seem much more interested in really digging in and not just showing up at church on Sunday, which for generations, I think that's what people did. It was, if you were good folks in town, you would see other people at church and you would go on Sunday whether it meant something personal or not. I got to tell you, there are churches here in Washington, D.C., which a lot of people think is not the most spiritual place in the world. But I'll walk in there, especially there are a couple of churches that are mostly young people, and they are ablaze. I mean, the music, the passion, the testimonies, the commitment. And I'm thinking these young people in this city that is many people consider it very secular, very godless, that they're showing up like this at church and there is a fire there is a beautiful thing. So I think young people are more committed if they are interested in faith, they're really fully embracing it. But there are those who have been burned in some way or been turned off. And I think what they really need are relationships and people actually in the day to day connecting with them, not hitting them over the head, but building relationship with them as just as Jesus did, saying, listen, I do want you to turn from your sin, but I didn't come to condemn you. I came to redeem you. And I think that's a message people of all ages need to hear.
Yeah. So Mark Batterson in Washington, D.C. Are you
Right.
familiar with? Yeah, that's one of those guys who
It's one
has
of the on fire churches here for sure.
absolutely national, isn't it called National Community
National
Church? I think.
Community Center. Yeah,
Yeah,
church.
yeah. So, and I've read his books. He's fabulous.
Fantastic author.
Yeah, yeah, he's very good. So, and the other thing that's kind of encouraging to me, and I'm wondering about this in terms of what we're talking about here, the Jesus Revolution, which was a
Mhm.
movie that was at the box office and set
Mhm.
all kinds of records in terms of its longevity in the box office, the amount of money it raised, and that was all about a previous Jesus movement, but there was so much interest in it today, which was kind of exciting.
And it was so well done. I mean, Lionsgate poured money into this. They wanted it to be a good production. And I know a lot of the folks that were involved with it, and Greg Laurie and Kathy Laurie, whose story is at the center of this movie, had told us that it was coming. And I thought, wow, that sounds amazing. When I saw it for the first time, my husband and I both wept. I mean, it was so beautiful. And
Yeah.
I think for people to see it and so well done and top-notch actors and production and everything else, it just really got to the heart of people that generation who were searching and they were looking. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people that we're always going to be searching. Every generation is going to be looking, whether you want to find it in relationships or technology or career or advancement or whatever it is. I think that those folks of that 60s and 70s generation who were really searching when they found Christ and they connected there, how powerful it was. And I think that we're always, just one bit of revival away from that. And that's something I pray for all the time, that, it usually starts with young people. It doesn't have to start there, but just that they would be open to, gosh, the way that Christ can give you a fullness and fill in all of those places where you're empty or hurt or searching.
And it was so exciting to out of all of that too. And I don't know that it was because of the movie or it was separate altogether, but the Asbury University
Yeah.
movement, the revival
The
there.
timing was amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And it was so exciting because you're actually seeing it in real time, in our time. So it was kind of it was pretty cool. So as a Christian, what would you say is the greatest positive slant on faith in America today? Again, kind of calling on you because you have
Mhm.
this great global view of what's going on in the world just because
Mhm.
of your involvement every day in what's happening. Do you have a thought on that?
I think that people really, what I see is that Christians are out there encouraging each other. They're showing up in places like Ukraine. They're working in trafficking issues. They're showing up the border here in the southern border in the U.S. They're trying to be real hands and feet in very practical ways. So that not only, I think, meets the call to service that Christ has given us to, the least of these, or whoever is struggling or whoever is in need. We know that's a call, but it also gives us a chance to share faith and model to people what you're about, that it isn't just about a political position or I got to win this or vote this way or whatever it is. But when they see us actually serving out there and being humble, and the last shall be first, that kind of idea, I'm seeing that all over the globe. And I have people, because we cover everything around the world, tell me about things that are happening in different places. And I know people personally who are doing that. And so I think it's a beautiful thing to see. And I do think there's this sense within a lot of the evangelical and Christian community that they're in some ways divorcing from politics. Not that they don't think it's important and that it can be a tool to accomplish certain things, but that it's not the most important thing, that sharing the gospel of Christ and serving people in ways that will bring them to Him is more important than, a particular party or a particular issue. So I feel like I'm seeing more of that.
Oh, that's excellent. That's good to hear and good to see for sure. What about the challenge? What's the biggest challenge spiritually in America today?
I think we have it so good. I mean, I really think, even though our economy is having a bit of a blip right now, I mean, compared to the rest of the world, America is a land of riches. Even those who are struggling the most in our communities, at least have a safety net where there are portions of the world where people don't get a set meal every day. They don't have what they need just in life to look out for their kids and to get an education, the most basic fundamentals of reading or having an opportunity. Here in America, I almost feel like there are waves of times where we're so comfortable that we don't see our need for something else. We think if we get enough education, or if we work hard enough, or if we have enough, we're an influencer and we have enough likes and we have enough followers. Even those among us who don't have, the richest of the riches are so much better off than most of the rest of the world, that it can be easy to be comfortable. Although I would say there are plenty of people in America who aren't comfortable, quote unquote, they're struggling. But for the most of us, if you're, I grew up sort of a lower middle class area. And even there, I felt like I've got a roof over my head, I've got food on the table, and, I've got a path forward to try to have opportunity and education and those kinds of things. So I think American Christians, we don't suffer anywhere near the same kind of persecution that places like China and North Korea and, many other pockets around the world suffer. So when I pray for those people, I remember that we're told so often they're praying for us as Christians in the Western world who, because often our faith isn't pressed in nearly the same way as theirs, it isn't as tried, it isn't as tested, and we just may be too comfortable sometimes.
I love that. Yeah. Now let's jump quickly into your, I know you're such a busy person. You've got like things going on right after us. So I want to make sure to get all these important things answered. I guess the one thing I always love to hear from our guests is when in your personal life has and we always all have a few of them where God has really shown up. I mean, he was like there and you knew it. Is there a time like that that you can share with us?
Yeah, and for me, it's been the worst valleys. I think a lot of people would say that. I always like to think like, oh, I could grow on the mountaintop and everything's great up there. Not that you can't, because you can. But for me, the deepest, most personal connections with God are when I've struggled the most. And I've written about and talked about the fact that I went through a chronic illness where I was in constant pain for 2 years. And it
Wow.
was a really difficult struggle bouncing from doctor to doctor. And people at one point had a doctor tell me, you're very emotional. And I was. And I thought, yeah, because I'm living in constant chronic pain. If you have done that or know somebody that you love, like it is the only thing you can think about 24 hours a day. Very hard for me to get any sleep. And it was really tough not having a diagnosis and being turned away, by the doctor who didn't want to help me. And, I was kind of sinking and he threw me an anchor instead of a life preserver. So there was the mental health issue that went along with it too. Now, I never felt like turning away from God. Like, how can you let me live like this? I don't trust you anymore. I don't believe in you. You're not good. I clung to him more than ever because I was in such a terrible, terrible place. And I got to a really dark place a couple years into this where I'm searching everywhere online for, help for somebody who shared my symptoms to just find a name for this thing that I had. And eventually I found a place where people were talking about, I can't live like this anymore. I'm going to end my life. And I remember thinking, that actually sounds like kind of a relief. I mean, I don't know how much more I can go on like this,
Really?
but I
Yeah.
knew enough in my soul and my spirit, like that wasn't the right way to handle this. And I remember confessing to my husband through tears that night, like that actually sounds like I would love to go to sleep and not wake up. I would love to just wake up in the presence of the Lord and this whole thing to be over. And he buckled down with me and started the search for a new doctor. And I finally found one who not only was able to diagnose what I had, that part of the story is when I got to him, he explained what was happening. I have a genetic cornea condition that meant my corneas were tearing all the time. If you've ever scraped the surface of your eye, I was doing that almost every day of my life. And it was never healing, and the wounds were getting deeper and deeper. And it was an excruciating pain, like 10 out of 10 all the time, double vision and migraines. And it was just a
Oh,
miserable way to live. So when he said to me on that first visit, I know what you have, and I've treated this before, it was the first time I'd almost felt a positive emotion in like a year. I had no hope. I had nothing but just clinging to, I know the Lord has purpose in this. And then he said to me before I left the office, he said, I have to tell you, he told me the name of this. And he says, there's no cure for this. And I couldn't get out of that office fast enough. I don't even really remember it. I remember getting to my car and just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. My husband's waiting for me to call him. I have to get back to work. And I just completely fell apart in that moment. Like, Lord, how can this be? Because I'd prayed, if you're not going to heal me, send me someone who can help. I believe fully that's how I got to this doctor. But in that moment, I thought, I cannot go on. I can't live like this anymore. There's no cure for this. And I've always said, like, I didn't audibly hear the voice of God, but I felt distinctly in my spirit that he said to me, I will be with you. Not, I'm going to heal you. I'm taking this away. You're going to be fine. I will be with you. It was like I heard him saying it, but not audibly, but definitely in my spirit. And it was enough for me to pull myself back together and find a way to just keep going forward one more day at a time, one more night at a time. And I went back to this doctor and he was able to help me manage for years. I finally got to the point where I had to have a surgery and I was really worried. I prayed about it for years because there was no guarantee it would work and it's exceptionally painful. But in my case, it has worked. And I'm 95% of the time, I would say probably now I'm up to like 98% of the time symptom free with my eyes.
oh my gosh, that is so great. And there was there vision problems during all of this too? I mean, you got
Mhm.
trouble with sight?
Yes.
Oh my
Yes, and I've
gosh.
always had trouble with my eyes. They were always kind of wonky since I was a kid. So I was the little kid with the big Coke bottle glasses and all of that. The interesting thing was when the surgeon said to me, he said, if we're gonna do the surgery, I can only tell you how bad it's gonna be going in. It was worse than he told me, but maybe that's all I could have handled. But he said, when I do this operation on your corneas, I can actually correct your vision. So it was kind of a nice side blessing that I don't have to wear any glasses or contacts now, although I feel like the reading glasses are coming. They're coming.
It happens to all of us, right?
Yes,
Yes.
they're coming.
Oh, yeah. So what period of time was this all happening in your career?
I was at Fox and I was covering the Supreme Court full time. I was about 40. So, it was a ways ago. I had been at Fox for a few years, but I felt like during that time, I really didn't tell any of my coworkers what was going on because I didn't have a diagnosis. And the doctor who had said to me that I was super emotional, I thought, am I crazy? It really gave me a crisis of confidence in a lot of ways. So, years later, when I finally got to the point where I had to have the surgery, I did tell some of my coworkers about that because I was going to be out for a couple of weeks with that. And that was really the first time I sort of let them know what was going on. But I had that surgery right as I was starting Fox News at Night. We launched that show in 2017.
So it was kind of, it was also a silent thing for you, which is also kind of brutal, right? Because,
Yeah,
and part of it was maybe career wise, you didn't want people to know that you
right.
were going through all of this stuff. So yeah, I
Yeah.
totally get that.
And a lot of people, it made me so much more empathetic to look around and say, like, we have no idea what people around us are suffering with. It's a family problem, a financial problem, a physical problem, a mental health issue. We just don't know. And so compassion is a good thing.
Yeah, no kidding. It is. So do you have a life verse, a scripture verse that you kind of call your own, or yeah, I guess that's the question. Or is there?
You know what? Yeah, I keep a little booklet of verses that people have sent to me or that have been important to me. And I read it right before I go on the air on Sunday mornings. It's the last thing I do before I start the show. And there's so many good ones there about, casting your cares on God and letting Him take care of your anxieties and, coming to Him in thanksgiving with your requests, and He'll give you the peace that passes all understanding. There's a verse when I was having a very big crisis in college and I opened my Bible and they say, like, don't just open your Bible and try to find something. But I just sort of did it on a whim anyway. And Psalm 34, which I think the whole chapter is fantastic, because Psalm 34:4, I sought the Lord and He heard my cries and delivered me from my fears. And so that one has always been good for me. The very first verse I remember memorizing was one my mom taught me in 2 Timothy. He's not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and a sound mind. And I feel like that works in a lot of situations too.
Yeah. And so your prayer ritual every day prior to starting the day, I understand and have read that's how you get rolling in the morning.
I've always sort of been that way, but it really solidified during COVID because I felt like every day when I headed to work, and for most of it, it was at home, but just to open the computer and to, we all had I had this obsession with checking the websites that were how many of the cases are spiking and how many people are dying. And we're watching economies fall apart and people's lives fall apart. And it was so much bad news all day, every day. And I would cry in the shower sometimes. And I would play Waymaker by Michael W. Smith, like on repeat. That song will always make me think of COVID. But I just realized I can't even look at my phone. I can't confront the world until I've been in scripture. For me, I like to journal. I like to pray in the morning. And that's just kind of putting on my armor and getting ready for whatever's going to come at me personally or professionally.
Yeah, I can see with a person that you clearly are passionate, clearly are emotional. So unless you root yourself in some kind of preparation for that
Mhm.
during the morning hours, it could be a rough day. But I
Yeah.
can totally get that. I'm going to have to let you go because Sammy, your
Yes,
trusted
she keeps me
assistant,
on track.
she is like all over me. She said she's got a half an hour. So,
Yes, yes, we're getting ready to interview former Vice President Mike Pence about his run for the 24 White House. So that is coming up, and we'll air that on Sunday.
oh, perfect. Well, so great to meet you. Such a
You
wonderful, warm
too.
human. And I got to tell the humbling story because at the Caleb Awards, you were on camera on the red carpet, and they said what you were having some kind of it was like a tuxedo outfit, and they said what a wonderful tuxedo outfit that is. That is just gorgeous. And they were going on and on about it. And who was the designer? And you said I got it on Amazon, and it was pretty cheap.
I mean, I like a deal. I like a deal. Part of my outfit was from Amazon. So I don't know who made it, but I'm happy to find a bargain wherever I can. I love a good sale.
Thank you, Shannon Bream, so much for your time. Telling our audience you got to go get the book, subscribe to the podcast. Again, that's called Living the
Live in the
Bream.
bream.
Yeah, which is cheesy but wonderful. All right, so that was good.
Just enough cheese. It is
Thank
such
you,
a treat
Shannon.
to
Have a
meet
great
you, and
day.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
God bless you too. Well, thank you for listening to this rendition of Amazing Greats with our episode with Shannon Bream from Fox News. Thank you for joining us here and subscribing and hitting like and passing this along to your friends, as that's how we grow our pod. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you from Amazing Greats